by the military-industrial complex.
And now, the Taliban will pay a price.
Do we have the confidence to do in the Middle East what our fathers and grandfathers accomplished in Europe and Asia?
The situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating.
What I do oppose is a dumb war.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Boardwalk Podcast. We took a week off to take a little time to get ready for this episode. We were venturing away from Kandahar, which we have only really done to talk about Afghanistan as a whole, and just looking over some of the books and stuff that we've kind of compiled. I kept seeing one about a little, I guess you can call it, and Michael can correct me if I'm wrong, but a collection of like journal entries and little short stories about his time there. But the Korengal Valley was the book's called Memories of the Korengal, and the Korengal Valley is probably most well known for people outside the military community for lone survivor. We wanted to kind of talk more about that area of the war and really how significant it was, because when you look at it, you know, it was literally the bloodiest part of the war, bloodiest area of the war when you look at casualty concentration and things like that. And it kind of got forgotten because we were out of the Korengal like a decade before we were out of the country. So we're gonna have a really good episode tonight. We've got Mikel Drnec. Is it Drnec? Drnec?
Mikel Drnec, yeah.
Yeah, Mikel Drnec, who, Michael, you were an infantryman with, was it First ID?
First ID.
Yeah, you were an infantryman with First ID out in the Korengal Valley. And then we have Wes Morgan, who, Wes was a journalist, and I thought this was the coolest thing I'd ever read, where you took your summers away from college to go and be a war correspondent. And Wes wrote a book called The Hardest Place, which is about the greater Pech Valley area. So, hey, guys, thanks for coming on tonight. We're really excited to have you. And we'll let you both take it away, introduce, a little bit of who you are and why you wrote your books, and we'll go from there.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.
Michael, you want to start? I can chime in later.
Go ahead and kick it off here. I wrote a book called Memories of the Korengal. It's a collection of short stories, different memories from my time overseas, just put into kind of a more poetic, expressive way of communicating that experience. And that book came out about summer of last year, and it's been fun talking to people about it ever since.
And Michael actually appears in my book. It's called the Hardest Place: The American Military Adrift in Afghanistan's Pech Valley. So the Pech is the valley that the Korengal abuts and flows into. So it's sort of about this valley system: the Pech, the Korengal, the Weigel, the Waterpoor, which is a place that I used to go as a journalist and got really kind of hooked on after a first visit in 2010. And the book covers the whole scope of basically rewinding to when the first special operators and CIA guys showed up in this part of the country in 2002, up through 2020 and the Doha deal. And we've got a paperback coming out shortly here that has a little bit of an updated epilogue to make it go through the events of the past 6 months.
When did you update? You said you got a addendum coming out to your book, Wes.
Well, it's just, the book came out last March, and the paperback is coming out in a few weeks on March 1st. And so I had the opportunity to go in and just make some minor changes. I mean, I didn't really, nothing big, but just, to reflect the fact that U.S. involvement has ended now, but not really any major substantive changes. I think the book pretty much stands because U.S. involvement up in that particular part of the country pretty much ended in 2020 before the 2021 pullout.
Okay. So, Michael, I read your book first, and going through it, I'm really impressed that at 18 years old you were able to come up with that, because there's no way in hell I had the vocabulary to be as poignant as you were. I thought it was a very, very vivid description of what war is like, especially for us who we're intel. Like we sit on a base and we just give you bad information apparently. So reading it, I was really blown away with it. What gets me is I believe it's the first story in your book about the soldier that gets medevaced, and I think it was his first sergeant. The only question he had was he clean shaven? And I think that really gets into the psyche of what's wrong with I will say the conventional military, right? Because Obviously, Stu, you were a group baby. They're not going to care about that type of shit, whether somebody's clean shaven or not when they're getting medevaced. Uh, but was that something that was like pervasive through the deployment, or is that just a one off from that one story? How important was stuff like that? Because I remember I can see the pictures. I watched some documentaries. I'm familiar with the Korengal Valley, and if I'm a leader and I'm looking at what's important, whether somebody's clean shaven or not in that environment is probably the very bottom of the list.
Yeah, it's kind of the catch-22 concept of the deployment, and I think it always starts off a little stronger in the beginning. People worrying about the upper chain echelon looking down and catching everyone out of uniform and whatnot. But as time goes on, that fear seems to kind of fade, and yeah, those priorities in the beginning are just like they're machine-like. Like war is a machine, and the way your leadership looks at it is the same way. They're just worried about covering their own ass in that situation.
Would you say, Michael, and would you say Wes, because it just, looking into your guys' books and everything, there seems to be a lot of condemnation of, Army leadership. It's not like we don't, on this podcast, we absolutely criticize Army leadership and government leadership, especially in the Afghan war. Can you guys talk about some examples? Wes, you can go first since Mike called the last one. Just some examples of just leadership failures that are memorable to you.
Sure. I'll say that when I used to embed with military units in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was typically kind of at what I would do is I'd come in through kind of like division, brigade headquarters, work my way down to a battalion, and then bounce around to different companies and platoons while I was visiting. So I kind of would get to see at each echelon a little bit of what was going on and talk to the commanders and their staffs at each echelon. And, in the Pech Valley, the first time I went there was in 2010, and I visited a place called Combat Outpost Michigan, which was at the mouth of the Korengal, where the Korengal joins the Pech. And the 4th ID, which was the unit that succeeded Michael's unit, had just finally pulled out of the out of the Korengal. I'm sorry. So the Korengal pullout had just happened, and kind of almost overnight, the Combat Outpost Michigan, which had been pretty much a quiet place, almost a couple years earlier, it had been like almost an R&R spot that a platoon might get rotated out of the Korengal to go chill at Michigan for a little bit. Pretty much overnight, Michigan now becomes the most kinetic outpost in RC East because sort of all that pressure that was in the Korengal now is just shifted down valley onto Michigan. And it was very easy for troops living at Michigan in 2010 to kind of think. As with a lot of these outposts up in the mountains in Kandahar and Nuristan, who would put an outpost in a place like this? What kind of moron would do this? Like just to get Americans killed, right? Like we're in this place, we're sucking down Dishka fire and recoilless rifle fire all day long. Multiple attacks every day. Like what? But of course, it's not the case that somebody who wanted to get Americans hurt put the outpost there. There's a context behind every one of these outposts. There's a story behind it. And so that was initially what I kind of set out to do. Was I just was interested in like when and where did each of these little bases, when and why did each of these little bases get built? Like what was the real story? Because by 2010, whether it's Michigan or Able, Maine or Honecker Miracle or Blessing, which were the 4 remaining outposts in the Pech at that point, you go to one of these places and you could ask the company commander or first sergeant, hey, when was this place built and why? And you kind of get a blank look because, not that it's their job to know the history of the outpost, but it was striking, right? That they kind of say, well, it was here when the company commander before me got here. Pretty sure it was here when the company commander before that got here. Guess it's always been here, right? Because U.S. forces up in Kunar, they had really been at it for so long that really the origin stories of these outposts had kind of been lost in the mists of time, even though it was just like 8 years, right, at the maximum. And so that was initially what I set out to do, was to try to figure out, what was in the heads of the people who established each one of these outposts, because I knew it had to be something more than, oh, I'm stupid and I want to get Americans killed by building an outpost in a place where the enemy has 24/7 observation of everything that's going on in the base, right? And that's what I did, was just kind of track back through, get the guys from one company to refer me to guys from the previous company, who'd refer me to guys from the previous company, until you get back to, the JSOC team or the Green Beret team that established this base in the first place, or the 10th Mountain, battalion or whatever, back when it was a much quieter place, when the context was not, there was all this constant fighting all the time. And in some cases, like with Michigan, the backstory was, well, this place was actually built as like a mortar fire support base for the guys in the Korengal. But then later, once the Korengal outposts are gone, now Michigan is in the thick of it, which it wasn't meant to be. So it evolves over time to the point where every one of these outposts is fulfilling a totally different role than whatever it was originally imagined to fulfill. And I think that's kind of one of the big failures of the war, is there was no kind of auditing process. And once these outposts get built, they're really hard to unbuild, basically. A lot of these outposts, they were established in 02, 03, 04, 05, 06 up in this part of the country. Typically with, not a lot of procedure put into it. It wasn't like, the 4-star commander of ISAF had to sign off on the establishment of these outposts. It was little Green Beret teams, maybe their battalion headquarters back at Bagram signed off on it. But then within a few years, things have snowballed. The outposts are big. They're built up. There's all this crap on them. They're named after soldiers who've died. And it becomes really, really difficult to unestablish an outpost, both for emotional reasons, not wanting to cede terrain to the enemy, not wanting to give up a place that Americans have fought for that's named after Americans who died. And also for kind of practical logistical reasons. There are never enough Chinooks in Afghanistan, never enough ISR feeds, right? And conventional forces especially were really hurt from that. And the pool of those things that you need to pull out of an outpost is the very same pool that all the other battalions in RC East are drawing on to do their big air assaults and everything like that. So the thing you'd see play out over time is, okay, we've decided we're going to disestablish this outpost finally, after a lot of debate, and a lot of different commanders over the years have said, "Oh, we don't need to be here anymore. Please, sir, can we stop?" Decision will finally get made, but it's still not kind of urgent sometimes until it's too late. It's often nobody's top priority to disestablish an outpost until, like with Kop Keating in Nuristan, that place was supposed to close. But then it was, it was hit, and enemy got inside the wire. And only at that point did it kind of become the big priority for resources to actually get it closed.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Wes. I think that there is when it comes to leadership, I do think there's a tendency to just perpetuate what has been handed down to you without any real knowledge of why. We talk about that a lot, almost to the point at the end of the war, nobody really knew why we were there to begin with. And I think that was a pretty common occurrence. Michael, go ahead, man. Tell us your example.
I mean, he's the encyclopedia of how all this comes together. From where I was sitting, it was more just frustration for the team leaders and squad leaders, the lower enlisted guys who are, complaining and going, "Why is this base here? Why aren't we moving up to this other area that's much safer, much better?" And just not getting any kind of real answer. And 6 months of that, a year of that, and you get frustrated. And you're angry. But following Wesley's roadmap, it's interesting to see how all this actually did happen. How most of it wasn't just negligence. There were reasons, logistical and otherwise, emotional. But it wasn't as black and white as I thought it was. And so it was really actually comforting to read his work.
One of the characters in my book, chapter 9 of the book, is about the 126 Infantry Battalion, the Blue Spaders, which was the battalion that Michael was in. And his company, Viper Company, was the one in the Korengal. And the battalion commander of this unit was a guy named Brett Jenkinson, who was a little bit of an eccentric guy, a little bit of a wild man as far as battalion commanders go, kind of cut from a different fabric than the kind of manufacturing line infantry battalion commanders that, a lot of the other guys were. And I think he was kind of doing two things. On the one hand, he was sort of trying to project downward to his guys, like, "Hey, yeah, we're here for good reasons. We got to be here. It's important." But at the same time, he knows himself, this is fucked up. This is, Jenkinson spent basically his whole deployment trying to argue to his brigade and division headquarters that the Korengal was a sunk cost, and he needed to get out of there. But basically, he was kind of screaming into the void, and nobody listened to him for the full year that he was, that he was the battalion commander in the Pech. He had this line that he used to say that was, the only way to fix the Korengal would be to build a dam and flood it. Just because he was so frustrated. And it really it probably was not visible, I think, to guys in the Valley for whom he's kind of this distant figure living in the relative safety of Fob Blessing. But he was being really torn up by the losses in the Korengal. I mean, to the point that it kind of wrecked him. by the end of that year in the Korengal. And what he didn't sort of appreciate at the time, I think, and probably nobody in the battalion would have been able to appreciate, because you can only see it in hindsight, is that his sort of yelling into the void, even though it didn't accomplish anything on his watch, it kind of changed the direction that the ship was heading a little bit. So that next kind of cookie cutter infantry battalion commander who came in, it didn't feel the need, I'm going to push farther in the Korengal. I'm going to build more outposts. I'm going to push the road even deeper, which was what the battalion commanders before Jenkinson had been doing. So it actually kind of set the stage for this eventual pullout from the Korengal and the Pech, even though it was kind of glacial pace, and he didn't see it on his watch.
So I think the question that kept coming up in that was like, why are we here? And what Wesley, I think you do a pretty good job. So I would say short answer is we kind of started in that area, that N2K, Nuristan, Nangarhar, Kunar area, because that's where bin Laden was at, and that's where Zawahiri was at. We do have quite a few listeners who have no familiarity with the military. Would you mind, Wesley, walking the dog a little and kind of giving some background into why exactly it seems like we really started the war effort in that N2K region?
Yeah, I think it's basically the case that often things happened up in N2K, meaning Kunar, Nuristan, and Nangarhar, kind of a little earlier than they happened in the rest of Afghanistan. Like the U.S. was just always on a little bit of the advanced program up there, and then you'd see it play out later on a bigger scale. So yeah, what brought U.S. forces up there in the first place was JSOC and the CIA, the Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 guys in the CIA. They were trying to figure out where bin Laden had gone, Osama bin Laden had gone after he escaped from the U.S. air bombing campaign at Tora Bora in December 2001. And so it turns out they actually were on the right trail. Where bin Laden went was Kunar, the province that the Pech and the Korengal are in. But they were always just a little bit behind him, and they never managed to pick the trail back up. And so over the years, what you see happen in the early years is things kind of snowball. The JSOC guys are up there. Eventually, they kind of get pulled out to go over to Iraq. They leave things in the hands of another tribe of special operations forces, the Green Berets. Eventually, the Green Berets, they keep a couple teams up there. But then eventually they get pulled out of the Pech as well, and it gets handed off to Marines who were there with them initially just as, security. And then from there, now that it's in the hands of the conventional military, it just keeps building up. There's a Marine platoon out there. Then there's a Marine company out there. Then there's a, bulk of a Marine battalion. Then you've got 10th Mountain Division comes in. And that's when the Korengal outpost gets built. But along the way in this story, 2004 is a pretty key year for the Korengal, because the Korengal outpost doesn't get built until 2006. But U.S. troops by that point are already kind of sucked into the Korengal conflict. And it turns out that the Korengal conflict was basically about timber. The backstory is there were a series of Green Beret teams that were working up in the Pech in 2003 and 2004. And they would, as they were going about their business in the Pech Valley, working with their sort of valley floor Pashtun informants, they'd be taking rocket attacks on their bases. There'd be the occasional IED on the road. And their informants would always be telling them, hey, this stuff's coming out of the Korengal. The bad guys are in the Korengal. And different Green Beret A teams had different reactions to that. There was one Green Beret A team that basically was like, something complicated is going on in the Korengal. We think that our sources have business interests that, this is not our business. We're not going to get sucked into the Korengal. We're ignoring these sources. And then the Green Beret team that succeeded them, basically they were really eager to get into fights. They wanted to go where the enemy was. They saw their job as just finding whoever it is that wants to fight Americans and fighting with them. They found it in the Korengal. But what really was happening was the Korengal Valley is a place with it's got these huge cedar trees as well as pines and firs. I mean, big conifer forest, much thicker than you really see in other parts of Afghanistan. And the Korengalis had kind of gotten rich selling this cedar to wealthy Arabs in the Persian Gulf, starting during the 1980s, during the jihad against the Soviets. But then they kind of got hooked on it, and they didn't turn it off after the jihad against the Soviets ended. But in order to get their timber to market in the Gulf, they relied on middlemen. And the first step of middlemen was the very guys on the Pech Valley floor that these Green Beret teams were working with and talking to. So they had this business relationship with these Safi Pashtuns on the valley floor. And when U.S. special operators show up in Kunar in 2002 and 2003, they're looking for interpreters, they're looking for militia, they're looking for intelligence. And they kind of set up shop on the valley floors because that's where the roads are. And they make friends with the very people who are sort of the Korengalis' business partners and rivals, the people the Korengalis sell the timber to. And these sort of timber barons on the valley floors, they basically use the American Green Berets unwittingly as muscle. They drag them along on, there's a key event that actually there's audio of, the first kind of real meeting between Green Berets and the Korengalis in 2003. It was actually the infamous Jim Gant was the Green Beret team commander who was present for this. But what happened was basically one of these sort of lowland timber baron guys who is ostensibly part of the new government sends a guy up one day to the Korengal to renegotiate the terms of the deal, to say, hey, we're not going to be paying you as much for your timber anymore. The Korengalis beat the guy up and send him back. They don't accept the new terms. So what does the timber baron do? He goes and grabs the Green Beret team, tells them, hey, the Korengalis aren't paying their taxes. You need to come along with us and tell them they need to pay their taxes. So Green Beret team goes up there. There's audio of it. It's pretty fascinating to hear this sort of very off-key analogy from this Green Beret major who's clearly doesn't understand what's going on around him, and is basically tells the Korengalis, hey, when I get a parking ticket in the United States, I pay it. It's very important to do your civic duty. You've got to pay your taxes. Not understanding that this is actually a complicated business arrangement that he's sort of being dragged into on one side. And so basically from that day forward, the Korengalis see the United States as on the side of their business rivals. And the Korengalis, in turn, go and invite the Taliban, who had not been in the valley before. They invite them in basically as their muscle. And what you see from that point forward, as a succession of U.S. units rotate through, and it becomes this place where a succession of rifle companies like Mikel's wind up spending really grueling deployments, it becomes this arena in which these two outside forces, the Americans and the Taliban, but with the Taliban, the Taliban have the Korengali population kind of on their side very implicitly because the Americans are threatening their livelihood. These two forces are kind of duking it out over this valley that neither of them had been in previously.
That's an interesting story. I had no idea that there were like a whole timber baron industry going on there. But I mean, it's very similar to what happened in Kandahar with like John Muhammad Khan and his guys basically using the United States as muscle to kill people he didn't like, or that were interfering with his business dealing.
Yeah, I think versions of this played out pretty much everywhere, whether it's over opium, whether it's over gems, whether it's over timber, whether it's over, something else. U.S. forces in the early years just weren't really equipped to understand the ways in which they were being, wielded as weapons in local like micro wars.
We were being wielded as weapons all the way up until we left. Like, let's be realistic, Michael, on that note, talking about the Korengalis, so one of the things I have seen in reading about the Korengal and watching documentaries and things like that is that there's a lot of foot patrols. There's going into villages, talking to people. I did see that. I guess there is some. Working with the Korengalis can be difficult, right? They're very distrustful of pretty much anybody that's an outsider. Can you kind of speak on those interactions with the Korengalis and what that was like as a infantryman trying to do a mission or a job that you're not really sure if you're really supposed to be there doing it in the first place?
Like Wesley said, the relationship had been mildly established prior to when I had shown up. But as far as my interactions with the locals, they were kept to a minimum. Being a lower enlisted guy, I didn't attend the shuras. I didn't sit next to the LT. It was mostly just observing, handing out some goods here and there at certain villages. But as far as interacting with the independent Korengalis, we didn't do that often. But as far as trusting them, we all knew that they were just not to be trusted. We understood the difficult situation that we were in, and that we kind of just had to turn our heads the other way and just kind of bite the bullet, literally.
Okay. Michael, you talked. Sorry, I was just going to ask. I mean, Michael, you talked to me for my book kind of about what the early days of your time in the Korengal were like. I mean, you arrived at kind of a really crazy time. This huge battle, the Battle of Wanat, had just happened in basically the valley next door. And then no sooner do you get there than there start being kind of these massed assaults on Firebase Vegas, the outpost where you were living, right?
And I remember we were still in Manas in Kyrgyzstan when we were watching the Wanat situation happen and play out on CNN. And they're like, yeah, this is where we're heading. And it was scary. So the conversation quickly became not so much about what are we going to do in the valley, what does success mean? It was, are we going to get overrun, and what are we going to do about that? So the paranoia was from day one. But once August kicked off and the firefights were 4 or 5 times a day, I mean, it's constant paranoia.
That's wild. So you were seeing firefights 4 or 5 times a day then while you were there? That's yeah. So that's a lot of combat, man. Can you, if you don't mind, would you go into one of those situations? Just tell the listeners about a particularly memorable moment doing that.
Yeah, there's one that Wesley actually talks about in his book. It's August 16th, 2008. We had a convoy going through the valley down the road, and they hit an IED, and it was a complex attack. So they opened up with small arms RPG fire all across the hillside, estimated between 50 and 100 enemy fighters along the wall, all the way up within about 25 meters of the fence, tossing grenades, danger close missions from the cop. It was scary. But it's covered pretty well in Wesley's book. I was at OP Little Rock, actually filming myself. I have it on camera, and you could see just all along the mountainside, just the trees lighting up from the enemy's muzzle flash. You could just see it all the way across the mountain, and it was just incredible.
That's wild, man. How many people were there at your outpost with you, and how many people would it take then to like overrun a defensive position like that?
There were around 30 U.S. troops and about 25 ANA, Afghan National Army. So, I mean, you would probably need around 100 guys if you're gonna.
Yeah, that's terrifying, man. That's absolutely terrifying. That's all it would take. Yeah, I can't imagine what that was like, man.
So, Michael, Wes was talking about how the COP commanders, they didn't know the history of the COP, and at times there was some ambiguity as to why we're even there. What was the we're all told something. What were you told was the reason you guys are at Firebase Vegas?
I mean, it was like a micro version of where we fight them here, so we don't have to fight them there. You guys are here to keep things from getting bad in the Pech. That was kind of our purpose. We're a wall, so that everything going on in the Pech River Valley can go smoothly. We were told that it was a pathway for arms smuggling. We were told that it surrounded the timber trade. That was a big conversation that took place. There were a number of reasons, but there was never an overarching, like, this is the reason, like you can find in certain military situations. So we understood that no one had like the real reason. And we were there to kind of be bullet magnets, I guess, just fish in a barrel.
Yeah. Like when you go through that little list, and obviously we're thinking 14, 13 years later, right? As an analyst, I look at those reasons and I think none of those have anything to deter the Taliban or Al Qaeda or anything like that, right? That's the whole reason we were there in the first place. So sending an infantry company or a platoon, right? 30 guys, sending a platoon to a fire base where they don't have the high ground. They're working with, or they have to work with locals who don't like them, who aren't going to help them. What's the point of it, right? And I do feel like that is that's just yet another symptom of this war. Like we've always talked about the war in Afghanistan from the perspective that we never truly committed resources. We never topped 100,000 military personnel, not infantry, total military personnel. And I mean, a good example of that is we got 30 guys at a fire base with 20 ANA, and they're sitting ducks for 9 months. Like to me, it makes no sense to even be there in the first place because all you're going to do is is risk casualties, and there's no reward with somebody's life on the line in that situation.
Yeah, and thinking back on it, it's a good thing I wasn't didn't carry much more rank than a private. Because, I had every reason not to be there once I was there. As time went off, the drum roll, the reasons they gave us for why we were there just became less and less effective, all the way up to the platoon leader level. When they start calling in patrols, ghost patrols, like, hey, we're leaving the wire time now, and everyone goes and takes a nap. Like that's when like this is starting to work its way up the chain. Like people are just starting to say like this isn't right.
How do you guys, I mean, as two guys who spend a lot of time there, view it? We kind of touch on this botched withdrawal, all of, the war being over now. Has the war ending changed your guys' opinion on it at all, or do you guys feel the same way you did day one?
The same way I did day one, but now I know I was onto something.
You feel vindicated, right? Yeah, the vindication is very real.
Vindicated.
Yeah.
But now you're forced at that point to deal with all those things you had put to the side that you couldn't prove, until time played out.
How about you, Wes? How do you feel after the time you spent there?
I think back on my first Afghanistan trip, which was actually it was like May 2009, so right at the end of when Michael's first Afghanistan trip was, pretty much. But I didn't go to the Pech yet at that time. But I remember, being out in Wardak and Logar, south of Kabul, and seeing, just seeing around Highway 1, the place is littered with like these carcasses of old Soviet vehicles. And you're like, it's like hard to imagine how that could have happened. And I was guilty of this. I thought that could never happen to the United States. No matter what happens in Afghanistan, the countryside is not going to be littered with, burned out MRAPs, because Americans are not going to do that. But of course, that's exactly what's happened. It's not that Americans left their vehicles burned out by the side of the road. Probably the Soviets didn't either. What's happened is they transfer them to their allied government, which then collapses. And then you've got exactly the thing that, that was so hard for me to imagine in 2009 is exactly what you see. I mean, Highway 1 is just absolutely littered with exactly that, the American version of those old Soviet armored vehicles that you'd see. It's definitely, I think how you feel about the withdrawal probably depends a lot on, the job that you had while you were in the country and your relationship with Afghans, right? I mean, whether you were, a young guy in an infantry platoon who kind of, you're in a place like the Korengal where your main interaction with Afghans was them shooting at you and giving you like hateful glares as you walked through your village, versus, maybe you're a Green Beret and you did deployment after deployment working with like the same group of Afghan commandos and really came to, care for them and love them. And I have a little bit of that too. I mean, I made Afghan friends, some of whom are still stuck there, some of whom have been able to get out. So it's definitely, feel very conflicted. I mean, very, very, very conflicted, as I think Afghans do. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, the situation that Afghanistan faces today is one where basically the country is much more at peace than it's been at any time since probably 2003, and yet it's in the middle of an economic catastrophe, and people are just starving.
Yeah, there's a huge economic crisis. I think anybody that listens to our podcast, we talked about it quite a bit. Just the lack of food, lack of humanitarian aid at the time.
For sure.
Yeah,
and in similar step with your first sergeant asking if the guy was shaving the Taliban or like taking the energy to forcibly like check people's beards. And do all this sort of secondary stuff while people are just dying of starvation. I mean, it's a pretty brutal situation overall there right now.
Maybe we'll luck out and they'll misprioritize so poorly that they'll resign in shame. I'm not counting on it, though.
It's funny. I mean, in Kunar, the part of the country where the Pech and the Korengal is, the tables are turned a little bit now. I mean, the Taliban actually they are now the counterinsurgent, and they've got an ISIS insurgency on their hands. And they're, Taliban, every once in a while now you hear reports, a Taliban pickup truck got blown up by an IED in downtown Asadabad, and so it's even though the Taliban were in there in the Korengal fighting alongside the Korengalis against the United States, since then, the Korengalis actually sided with ISIS against the Taliban. And in recent years, the Korengal was actually a site of a lot of combat between the Taliban and ISIS-K. I mean, that's sort of where I end the book, is with a guy who's still in the Army. He's a senior NCO, but his first deployment was as a specialist with basically the company before Michael's, the first company that lived at Firebase Vegas. And he, years later, was back in Afghanistan in 2018 or 19, and is kind of tooling around on the Blue Eye or whatever it's called, looking at ISR feeds from his old haunts where he used to, because on his more exciting deployment back in the Korengal, and he sees, oh, there's people fighting in there, even though Americans have been gone forever, right? And he actually is able to watch kind of in real time as the Taliban and ISIS fight in some of the same old fighting positions against each other where he had fought against the Taliban. And the story actually ends in this really strange way, where in the Korengal and the places surrounding it, in the months preceding the Doha withdrawal agreement in 2020, the JSOC task force at Bagram was actually doing airstrikes, as was described to me by members of this task force, doing airstrikes in support of the Taliban against ISIS in this same area, and using the same old intelligence collection tools that you guys are familiar with, listening in on cell phones and ICOM radios and so on, not to figure out where Taliban are anymore to hit them, even though they're doing that everywhere else in the country at the time. But to figure out, oh, this Taliban subcommander is concerned about this ISIS machine gun nest up on the hill before the assault tomorrow morning, so let's be sure to hit that machine gun nest for him. The Rangers, they kind of jokingly called the Team East in the headquarters, they called it the Taliban Air Force, because there was, they were the point.
I'm glad we can put aside our differences and fight with the true dregs of the earth. Yeah, it's nice to see us all coming together. That's an interesting story.
That we have been more than vocal about the issues with the Doha agreement. Never heard about that one though. So just another notch on reasons why that agreement's awful. That's fucking holy shit.
Yeah, it's interesting to become old news so quickly. Not too long ago, I started looking into perhaps taking a trip back to the Korengal and meeting some of the people that I had met while I was out there and built relationships with, and they've moved on. They're not, when you're like, oh, are they going to be worried about seeing me? They're like, yeah, they'd be fine with seeing you. Of course, why wouldn't they? Their enemy is ISIS. Yeah. So it's you become old news really quick in Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's I'm still that's an interesting story that you told there, Wes. That's crazy.
Yeah,
where do you guys see the future going now that we're out of there and we all get to live with the memories of it? What do you guys think the future is?
I don't know. I mean, the Taliban is now in this position of, they're in charge. They've made their bed. They have to sleep in it, right? And to what degree they're able to counter this ISIS insurgency in the Northeast, I just have no idea. It doesn't really seem like there's any real opposition force besides that sort of small ISIS insurgency in this limited area of the Northeast.
What about you, Michael? What do you think?
I think it depends on who you are in Afghanistan. Your future is definitely different. If you're, a middle-aged man, your future is really uncertain. If you're a young woman, your future is very certain in the wrong ways. As far as what the future holds for the country as a whole, I think is going to be based on how they deal with, international politics, on how they set themselves on the global stage, how they deal with these issues, and how they present themselves to the world.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be the kicker, right? Because you look at it, and I know we've talked about it several times, where we're withholding the funding for the Afghan government, right, which happens to be the Taliban now, because we don't like how they treat women and ethnic and religious minorities. But I think eventually we're going to get to a point where somebody somewhere is going to have to decide whether giving the Taliban that money, despite them being terrible, in the name of helping people that aren't the Taliban, is worth it or not. And I think it goes 50-50 either way. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other on if we do that. Right. But I think we're gonna get to the point where it's gonna be a the toss of a coin on whether or not we ultimately give them that money because of the other 42.5 million people.
Yeah, and the question is there going to be a humanitarian crisis that's going to have to get pushed to tipping point to make that money move, and that's something I'm afraid of.
How do you guys feel about it? Like letting the Taliban have access to that money? I mean, do you think they'd do any good with it, or do you think it would just go to their business partners and their own personal interests?
Both. I mean, if you're looking for stability in the near future, yes, give them the money. But everyone's doing what they can to kind of hold that carrot out to see what they can do and how they're going to react on the global stage. And that money is the only thing that's going to make them dance right now.
Yeah, I mean, Taliban fighters are hungry too, right? So, I mean, I think it'd be a fair assumption that any aid kind of first goes to to help the Taliban kind of feed its own people rather than having dessert or whatever. But you would hope that nevertheless, still some of it makes its way to people in need, better than nothing.
So I did have the question I thought of when you talk about how the Korengalis view ISIS now as the outsiders. Is my chronology right on that?
A little backwards. I mean, the Korengalis
Sorry.
actually the Korengalis are Salafis. So there are some of them who have sided with the Taliban, some who have sided with ISIS. But for a period of time there, it was sort of the center of ISIS's Kunar area of control.
Yeah, that's what it was. I only wrote 2 words instead of my question. So like, is some of that beyond the obvious Salafist connection? What I kind of gather is that the Korengali, it's not anti-authoritarian, right? But it's anti-outsider at this point, right? Like you said, the Taliban were. It seems like they were invited into the Korengali or the Korengal Valley and to work with the Korengali people. Is that kind of the impression you get, that no matter who's in charge of the government or of the country, that the Korengali, unless it is by some way of magic a Korengali, that the Korengali people will just have this anti-authoritarian, anti-outsider look at whoever is the person in charge?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that Korengal is a really insular place. I mean, an important thing to mention here is that the Korengalis it's not just a bunch of people who live in a particular place. They're actually a distinct and very tiny ethnic group, basically. They're part of an ethnic group called the Pashai people, who used to be all over northeastern Afghanistan a few hundred years ago. But now there's only a few pockets of them left, and the Korengal is one of them. So they actually have their own language. Korengali is not related to Pashto or Dari. It's mutually unintelligible with those languages. So it's a really isolated place and a really insular place. And there are accounts of it. I mean, you can go back to so the first reference I've ever found to the Korengal was in 1840 during the first Anglo-Afghan War. There was a British military force from the East India Company that went up into Kunar to kind of kick out one strongman and put in a different strongman. And they didn't make it as far as the Korengal, not even close. They made it, partway up the Kunar Valley, did what they needed to do and left. But when they left, there was actually a botanist, an East India Company botanist, who was so interested by kind of like the forests and stuff that he stuck around for a few months after and traveled around Kunar. And in his journals, you can read, the spellings are different. It's transliterated differently. But there's a point where he goes to the mouth of the Korengal and he meets Korengalis. And he asks if he can come into the valley, and they say no. And then this happens again in the 1960s. There's an American linguist who's going and studying all these little interesting languages that there are remnants of up in this part of the country. And a lot of them are very welcoming, and they're interested in having their language studied. But when he comes to the mouth of the Korengal and asks if he can come in and talk about their language, it's no. So I think a way that I think some American troops came to understand it was. We showing up here, this is like if a ton of FBI agents descended on some town in Appalachia, right? Like that's the kind of place that we're talking about. These are mountain people who really would prefer to be left alone by any central authority.
Me too. So
yeah, I'm a big fan of being left alone.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's what I get. Like reading and Wes, like you said, your book really it starts at the beginning, right? There's the failed efforts to get Bin Laden before the Tora Bora Pass, and you go into. I just finished up where we conducted a bombing on, I think it was Ghulam Rabbani's a relative's house, or his like compound, a couple of houses and a mosque, trying to find Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. And I'm reading through it, and we have the aid of 18 years of hindsight, or 16 years, 17 years of hindsight, whenever it occurred. And but thinking about it as an analyst, I'm like, there's no way you had enough information to make this drop and target this compound. And you kind of get into that, right? Where Karzai says, kind of the same thing. And clearly Ghulam Rabbani is upset. He lost 6 or 7 family members. And then we get to the two theories, right? Theory one is that these were business rivals of Ghulam Rabbani, because it's all timber, right? Like it's all that same concept. And then the other idea was that the first iterations of the NDS were all KGB trained spies, and that means they sided with the Soviets in the Soviet-Afghan War, and this is essentially using the U.S. for revenge killing. I'm more skeptical of that reasoning than the first reasoning, because I think what we kind of saw in Kandahar was that usually whenever a very rich source said, "Oh, this guy's he's a Taliban financier or weapons facilitator or whatever," he was just a business rival, right? So it is very, right. I'm not sure what word to use, but it's very telling that it's ubiquitous throughout the country.
Yeah. The incident you're talking about, I tend to think it's probably the latter case. I mean, because unlike the Korengal, the Weigall is not a place that has a timber trade or a gem trade. It's much more kind of, subsistence. And Ghulam Rabbani was not a guy who really had business dealings. He was sort of just like this austere, religious scholar figure kind of guy who lived up on his mountain and was kind of known as a peacemaker between different factions in Kunar. But he had, as you say, so he had made some enemies in the communist regime in the 1980s, because during the 1980s he had sort of served as the peacemaker between different Mujahideen factions that were fighting against the Soviets. So these old KGB guys who we know are who these NDS guys wound up being, that the CIA relied on. I think they basically, the theory is they took advantage of a situation in 2003 where the United States had sort of taken its eye off the ball of the bin Laden hunt with the war in Iraq. But then in the fall of 2003, it's Democratic primary season for the 2004 election. All the Democratic candidates are coming out talking about, oh, Bush took his eye off the ball of bin Laden. We'll get bin Laden if we come into office. And so there's, a directive kind of comes down from the White House, both to the Pentagon and to the CIA, that's, okay, pick bin Laden's trail back up, pronto. And so what happens is they surge up into Kunar and Nuristan, because that was sort of the last place they thought he had been. And they think that bin Laden is likely in the company of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, which isn't quite right. It turns out that he had been with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar a little earlier, about a year earlier, but they had since parted ways. And these two sources tell the CIA, they basically get the CIA to do a strike on a particular house, on a particular compound that winds up being, it's not, this rigorous analysis does not go into this, because it's not part of the kind of, the rigorous targeting process that comes later in the war. This was just sort of a seat of your pants. It's authorized by the CIA director himself, do the strike. And it really winds up being, a pretty disastrous thing, both for obviously the people who were there, many of whom were killed, and the family that was devastated by it, but also for the U.S. troops who fought up in the Weigall later in the war. Because this strike, although it was executed by military aircraft, it was a completely classified CIA operation that it took me a really long time to find, CIA people who would speak about, for instance. And so when U.S. infantry guys actually moved up into that same valley in 2006 and started building outposts there, very much like the ones that Michael's company had in the nearby Korengal, the aftermath of this airstrike kind of was waiting there like a booby trap. Nobody told them about it because it wasn't even a military operation, right? It was all a classified CIA thing. And so the first of these 10th Mountain guys ever hear about it is, they're told about it by locals who are like, yeah, we don't like you Americans because of this horrible thing you did in 2003. And these 10th Mountain guys, they don't know whether to believe it. They don't know whether, it really happened, or if it did happen, whether, people are telling them a tall tale about it to get compensation money or what. But it was something. It was like a disadvantage from the get-go that the military had doing counterinsurgency in the Weigel Valley because of something that basically the CIA had done, that the left hand had done without the right hand knowing, back in the very early years of the war.
And it wouldn't be the first time the CIA has destabilized something for the detriment of other human beings, would it?
They don't do that, Kyle. Come on now.
Can you talk about that, Michael? Is that what they were telling you while you were there too? You mentioned that airstrike.
No, actually, I had never heard about that. That's fascinating to find that out. I mean, and I'm sure there's 1,000, smaller stories that are similar to that really boiled up and made us that kind of a connection almost impossible. But yeah, that's fascinating.
I can only imagine, like, hearing that now, like, especially in your shoes, Michael, as an infantryman. Like, you got to go into this area where their first interaction with the Americans were a series of night raids and us bombing civilians, right? So have fun with that. Like that's a recipe for disaster, right? And it's like, with that, we've kind of touched on it. I became disillusioned with the war in Iraq after I went to Iraq. I think most veterans who become disillusioned with war, it's because they went and served in that war. Does that ring true for you with Afghanistan?
I learned about the war as I fought the war. I wasn't, sitting at home doing research in the barracks every night before I deployed. I was drinking Bud Light, and so everything was kind of a shock to me as it came, and I took it with a grain of salt, one after another, until finally it becomes too much, and you become disillusioned, and you step back, and you're like, all right, my job isn't to help these people or to change this place. It's to get back home, because this is never going to get sorted out. That happens pretty quickly. Yeah, it was a couple months before most minds were on that path.
It's amazing how quick it turns, isn't it? From some like grand overarching idea, to a to your own little personal war, for whatever.
Exactly.
I think about that, how just like it's amazing how there's just there's that one moment where everything does a complete 180. Like I grew up right outside of Fort Bragg. An Army brat, and I supported the wars because fuck, my parents were fighting in the wars, right? So I want mom and dad to come home. And I remember talking to some friends of mine later on, and the theme that kept coming back up was, well, it's about making sure the guy to your left and right get home. And I was like, you do realize that if we're doing this just to make sure the guy to the left and the right get home, maybe we shouldn't be there, right? And there's like, I never thought about that. Like, why the fuck will we insert ourselves somewhere? And the whole reason we're there is make sure that my best friend Tom makes it home with me. And like, it seems like all the enlisted, or not all, but a lot of the enlisted have kind of figured that out, and some officers have figured that out. But you still had generals pounding the desk saying that this war is a success and that we're making progress, and that any day now the Afghan people will accept democracy and all will be right in Central Asia.
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly the time period that Michael was there. A lot of the rest of Afghanistan, the surge was just beginning, but in the Korengal, it was like kind of the jig was up already. But the generals didn't acknowledge it yet. I mean, this was sort of still stuff that guys in the companies and the battalion knew, but that the generals weren't ready to acknowledge. And so it was another couple years before they actually authorized the Korengal pullout. But basically this arc had already played out where, U.S. forces got sucked into the Korengal over this timber dispute. Then, there's the 10th Mountain Unit that's there in 2006, 2007. They kind of see the Korengal as just like, we're fighting there just to keep the fighting away from the Pech Road, because we've got good things going on in the Pech Road, which they did at the time. But so we just have to kind of keep the fighting up in the hills in the Korengal, keep the Korengalis away from the road so they can't do any damage. Next unit rotates in, does 15 months out of Italy, 173rd Airborne Brigade. And they something is lost in translation a little bit as happens during these transitions. And so the 173rd was much more ambitious. They thought, well, okay, the 10th Mountain built this road in the Pech, and that's working great. So we'll push the same road up the Korengal, and that'll bring the Korengalis over to the government too, the way the people in the Pech have been brought over to the government. But that never works. And so, by the end of their deployment, they've only pushed this road, a couple of kilometers. And this is the point when Michael's battalion rotates in under a battalion commander, Colonel Jenkinson, who takes a look at this and says, "Whoa, what the 173rd was trying to do was impossible. I mean, insane. Like they're trying to pave a road up the back of the Korengal Valley and down the adjacent valley. Just in physical terms, the road itself is not going to persist in the kind of the rainfall and rockfall up there." So the whole year that Michael was there, kind of what you see happen is the company itself really does is just fighting to protect itself. I mean, and that's the argument that Colonel Jenkinson keeps making to his superiors. He makes to General Petraeus when General Petraeus comes and visits. Is all we're doing at the outpost at this point is protecting ourselves. The road has fallen by the wayside. We don't even use the road anymore. It's becoming increasingly dangerous even to do the helicopter resupply that they're kind of restricted to. I mean, there's two different helicopters that are shot down right by Firebase Vegas in the time that Michael is there. And it kind of parallels what had happened with the Soviets, not in the Korengal, because they never built an outpost in the Korengal, but the Soviets when they were in the nearby Pech. It was kind of, first they became isolated to aerial resupply. Then the enemy started hitting the helicopters. And Michael's company commander, Jimmy Howell, and executive officer, John Rodriguez, they recounted this, basically having a conversation in the spring. They'd already been there like 9 months or so, where the Korengali elders basically said to them, like, "Hey, yeah, we know you guys are not bad guys. We sit and talk with you because you're here. We did the same thing with the Soviets, until they went away." And this kind of crystallizing for these officers, like, man, we really just are here to wait out our time until it's over.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting. I think a lot of us are just waiting out our time until it's over. None more so than Michael here in freaking Outpost, man. That's a terrifying story that you shared. We thought we'd wrap it up here. We're about an hour in, so I'd like to give you guys last comments. Michael, you can take it away, and then Wes, anything you want to say after Michael's done? And thanks.
Yeah, I just thanks for having me on. I just wanted to touch once more on Wesley's book, The Hardest Place. And if you're going to look into the Korengal Valley, it's definitely like look at his book. It is an encyclopedia of everything that has happened there, especially if you have served in the Korengal and you want to make sense of that deployment. Look at this book. I can't speak highly enough of it. But yeah, thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Michael. It means a lot to hear you say that. I mean, the book, it was a real privilege to be able to talk to hundreds of guys like Michael who shared their experiences of this one small part of the country, to try to piece together this mosaic of, all these different guys' experiences from different periods of time over 20 years. You should check out Michael's Instagram. I mean, if you want to see photos of it's hard to appreciate what the Korengal is without looking at photos of it. Because it's just how green it is with the vegetation, how steep it is, what it looks like when a helicopter goes down outside the base. Michael's documented that very well with his photos that he posts. So it definitely would be a great place to kind of get a sense of, while you're listening to the episode, maybe, look at this Memories of the Korengal Instagram, and you'll see the place that we're looking at and why it is so difficult. And thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your side of the story. I think when it's all said and done, the only people that'll, we basically are recording the history of this war. I mean, in whatever little ways we possibly can, or big ways you possibly can, but somebody's got to tell the stories. So thanks, guys, for coming on.